2 Kings chapter number 4, verses 25 through 26. And here we see this story of the Shunammite woman and a man named Elisha. Now, Elisha is a prophet. The Shunammite woman is a lady who is well off. She's well off. And every time Elisha stops in, she's feeding him. And it all started with one, right? Like this one time Elisha came through Shunem, and this lady was like, hey, are you hungry? Would you like some food? And how many know you do not forget when somebody gives you free food, right? Somebody gives you free food one time, you're hooked, right? Growing up, you knew which mom would give you free food if you went to your friend's house. And that was the most popular friend, right? That's whose house we're going to, the one who's giving me free food. You don't forget free food. So Elisha starts going to this lady's house and her husband, and eventually he comes so often when he's passing through that they build him a room on top of their house. And so to show his appreciation, Elisha's like, hey, what can I do for you? Like, what do you need in your family's life? And she looks at him and she's like, I don't need anything. I'm good. Everything's great. But Gehazi, who was Elisha's servant, says, she's got no children and her husband is old. Like, that's kind of rude. I don't know. Maybe you're like, oh no, you just speak your mind. To me, that's kind of rude. Gehazi's like, she has no kids and her husband is old. If I'm her husband, that's like fighting words. Like, who are you calling old? Gehazi? What kind of name is Gehazi? You know, like I'm going at it. But he says, she has no kids, her husband is old. And so Elisha says, well, by this time next year, you're going to have a son. And she doesn't really believe it because she understands that her husband is old. She doesn't truly believe it. And she kind of says, like, I don't want you to get my hopes up, right? Don't tell me I'm going to have a son when I'm really not going to be able to have a son. Don't get my hopes up. But a year later, she has a son, gives birth to the son, and then the son grows up, is out in the field one day serving, and all of a sudden just becomes sick and ends up dying in his mother's lap. Now, that's where we pick up today. That's a lot, right? That's a lot to have. But we pick up in verse 25, 2 Kings 4. It says, so she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. And when he saw her in the distance, the man of God said to his servant Gehazi, look, there's the Shunammite. Run to meet her and ask her, are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? Everything is all right, she said. But everything wasn't all right. Okay, her son, is dead. In what world is that all right? And I love that Elisha was specific. He says, like, is your family all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? And she said, everything is all right. And it's amazing to me because none of us in that moment would have said, everything is all right. I know I wouldn't have said it's all right. I'm coming to you with a problem, Elisha. I'm coming to you with a problem that you created. I didn't even ask for this, but here I am. I've had a son. I got my hopes up, and now my son is dead. That is not the definition of everything is all right. But she says everything is all right. And when she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. Did I ask for this? Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said. Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? I think if we're honest on this 4th of July Sunday, then we would admit that many of us find it easier just not to get our hopes up at all. Right? If we're honest, we would admit we would rather never see a glimmer of hope than to be let down. It just seems better that way. It seems better to never have a glimmer of hope than to get your hope up and all of a sudden have it be let down when everything falls apart. Because many times the pain of lost hope is unbearable. Having the pain of losing the hope that you had is unbearable. Where are my Hawks fans at? The pain of lost hope. You had a hope. I had a hope that they were going to pull it through. And then you lose the hope and it's unbearable. Like wake up this morning, because like I said, it's Saturday night, I had to go to bed. When they went down by 20, I was like, turn this junk off, right? The pain of lost hope, though, you would rather them just like never even get your hopes up in the first place. You would rather God never get your hopes up in the first place than to get your hopes up and then lose whatever it is that you were hopeful for. You would rather your family never get your hopes up, your job never get your hopes up, your spouse never get your hopes up in the first place than to get your hopes to a level expecting something great only to be let down. Many of us, if we're honest, that's how we would feel. But what if hope is what keeps the story alive? What if the hope is what kept the story alive in the first place? This lady from Shunem, it seemed like the end of her story, but she had a hope in her son. And what if the hope that you have, even though it seems like the end of the story, is what lets you know it's not over yet? What if that hope is what helps you continue to persevere when you want to quit and want to give up? This lady from Shunem is like, listen, Elisha, I never even asked you for a son, but Elisha told her she'd have a son. Now she's had a son, and now he has died. And this mom was determined, and she goes to find Elisha because she was determined, and she said, there is no way that this can be the end. Have you ever had a time like that in your life where it looked like the end, it felt like the end, it seemed like the end, but you were like, there's no way that God brought me this far. There is no way that God brought me through all of this just to let it be over right now. There is no way that God brought me to this level in my life only to leave me here. There is no way that this can be the end. So I want to talk to you this morning on the subject, this can't be the end. This can't be the end. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for today. And I just thank you that we have this opportunity of freedom to gather together, to lift up your name, to worship your name when so many around the world don't have this freedom. God, I pray that you would help us not to take it for granted. Pray that you would speak to our hearts, speak to our lives today. Help us to have ears to hear from you, to listen to what you have to say and to apply it to our lives. And I thank you for it in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Now, have you ever been in a situation before where somebody asked you what was wrong and you told them, I'm all right? You ever had a time where somebody asked you what was going on and you were like, oh, I'm all good. You know, like I'm all right. It's all good. No, everything's great. And we do this for a different variety of reasons, even when it's not all right. We do it for many reasons. One reason is because we just want to have the faith, right, that everything's going to be all right. So we just keep telling ourselves that it's all right, even though we know it's not all right. Then there's the times that we just don't want to have to talk about it, right? Like when you're going through something, many times you just don't want to have to talk about it. And then there's people you just don't want to have to talk about it too, right? Because there's people that if they ask you what's wrong, they're just looking for gossip, right? They're just looking for what they can go and tell other people. And then there's people, they ask you what's wrong, but then all they do at the end of it is make you feel worse about it. Like, oh, you know the criers, right? The ones that cry immediately. Like you tell them what's wrong and you just finished boo-hooing for like 3 hours and then you tell them what's wrong and they break down in front of you and cause you to go back down crying. It's like sometimes you just want to tell people, I'm all right. I'm good. I'm okay. For me, I tell people it's all right because I'm generally trying to fix it. That's me. Where are my fixers at? Anybody fix it? Yeah, I got some honest people, the fixers. Yeah, you ask me what's wrong, I'll tell you something's all right, even when it's not, because I'm just trying to fix it. And my wife, Nicole, knows me better than anybody. She can look at me and she'll say, what's wrong? And I'm always like, I'm all right, I'm good, everything's great. But she can tell when I'm stressed. She can tell when I'm worried about something. She can tell when something has happened that is not good, and I'm just trying to figure it out. And she'll ask me, and I'll tell her, I'm like, I'm good, because I don't want to have to tell her something if I can handle it, right? I don't want to have to burden her with something. She has her own things to deal with. So if I can handle it, I'm going to try to handle it, especially if it's something that's not really that major of a deal. I'll just be like, I'm all right. It's all good. And this started back when we were dating. I bet we had not been dating for probably about a month. And we went out to eat at Maggiano's out at Perimeter Mall. And we had about a 45-minute wait. So I was like, well, let's go walk around the mall. And we went to her favorite store. It's called Madewell. So we go into Madewell, and we're walking, and she's looking at things, and she's like, oh, this is cute. I love this. This is nice. She's like, I got to wait and see this go on sale, all this kind of stuff. And so I said, well, let's get it. She kind of laughed, and she was like, I don't get paid until, next week. And I was like, no, I'm going to get it for you. And she said, which one? And I was like, all of it. Right? That's what you do. You be irresponsible to win the lady. That's what you do. Like all of it. Here's what I hadn't done. I had not looked at the price tags. So I'm like, all I knew is T.I. had a song out at the time, right? You may remember it, Whatever You Like, right? You can have whatever you like. So I'm like, T.I. said it, I'm going to do it, right? You have whatever you like, all of it. Let's just get all of it. And so she hands it to me, and I'm all excited, right? Because you can tell, she's blown away. Nobody's ever done this for her before. This is a monumental moment in her life, and I am the man who has stepped in to do it, and I'm like, that's what I'm talking. That's the reaction I was looking for, right? That is what I'm talking about. And I was all excited because I hadn't looked at the price tags yet. And so then I looked at the price tag. You ever looked at a price tag and you did a double take? Is the decimal in the wrong place? So I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this better be suggested retail. This needs to be are we at a discount store? We at a thrift shop. What's happening? And so she looks at me. She's like, what's wrong? Are you okay? She's like, I feel so bad. I really don't want you to. I'm like, oh no, I'm all right. The heart is willing, but the spirit is weak. I'm like, I'm all right. I know. And listen, I had completely. Y'all gotta understand. I wasn't balling, okay? I wasn't even balling on a budget. There's no ball in the court. It's out of bounds. I just bought a house, had to pay moving, those expenses, way past my budget for the month. I'm freaking out, and I'm looking at this thing, and then I got to pay for dinner on top of it. We hadn't even made it to dinner yet. And I'm freaking out. She's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, no, I'm okay. But see, it wasn't okay with the price, but the amazing thing was it was still okay, because to this day, this is one of her favorite stories to tell about when we were dating, is the time that I went out and I was like, you can get that. I got you covered. That's one of her favorite stories. So even though in the moment it wasn't all right, at the end of the day, everything was still all right. It still worked out. Now, I'm sitting here, she's like, are you okay? And I'm shaking my head, yes. Inside, I'm like, no. But I'm like, yeah, everything's all right. And she was like, so I get up to the cash register, and I'm trying to figure out, which credit card do I put out? So I'm kind of trying to be like, can you take half on this one and half on that one? But I don't want her to know. And so she comes up, and she's like, was everything okay? Because she's like, this never happened before. She's so worried. She's like, everything okay? And I was like, everything's all right. Everything's all right. Relax. I got it. Everything's all right. Everything wasn't all right in the moment. But I'm like, God, you're going to have to make a way, because I know you sent her to me, and I ain't going to mess this up. So if you sent her, God, you're going to have to work it out. Might have to go to the bank of dad later. I don't know, but we're going to work it out. It's going to happen. But she's like, what's wrong? And I said, everything's all right, which is exactly what the lady in Shunem said when they asked her what was wrong. She said, everything is all right, but everything was not all right. And the first thing I need you to write down this morning is everything is all right. If you're facing some opposition, if you're facing some difficulties, if you're facing some questions, I need you to take a breath and understand everything is all right. Everything is all right. She's sitting there, and she has a son who has died in our text today. And Gehazi asks her, what's wrong, in verse 26? And she says, everything is all right. Now, I don't know about you, but that would not have been my first response. The first thing I would have said in this moment is not, everything is all right. I'd have been sitting there like, help! I need help. It's over. I can't take it. I can't handle it. It's not all right. But she looked at him and is like, everything is all right. I know my mom, she was inconsolable when I broke my wrist playing soccer in high school. I don't think she'd be saying everything is all right. My wife, Nicole, I know she would not be saying everything is all right. But she looks at the man and she said, everything's all right. And I don't know about you, but what I've noticed is that so often in our lives, the last thing we want to hear when we're in a painful situation, the last thing we want to hear when we're pouring our heart out and we're crying and we're distraught, the last thing we want to hear is everything is all right. I'm just going to be honest this morning. I know we're in church and I know we're supposed to, everything's all right, it's going to be okay. But the truth is, that's the last thing we want to hear when things are going awry, is that everything's all right or everything's going to be okay. But amazingly enough, that is the very first thing that anybody ever says to us. It's the very first thing that we say to other people. Oh, it's going to be all right. It's going to come here, give me a hug. It's going to be all right. And you hear that, but you're like, you didn't get the news that I just got. So how are you going to tell me that everything's going to be all right when you don't even understand that my world just crumbled? I just heard something from the doctor I thought I would never hear. I just lost something I thought I would never lose. How are you going to tell me that everything is all right? But what is amazing about the Shunammite woman's story is that she's the one saying everything is all right. She's the one who has the son who has died, but she is the one saying everything is all right. She wasn't saying she's all right with her son being dead, but she was saying she's all right with the one who's in control. And she knew that even when everything was not all right, it was still all right, because it was not long ago that she couldn't even have a son. And a man showed up in her life and told her, hey, you're going to have a kid. And then she saw the fulfillment of something that she thought was completely impossible. It wasn't long ago that she had seen something that should have never happened take place. It wasn't long ago that she had seen something that should have never even been a possibility show up in her life and be fulfilled. She had already seen God do the impossible in an area of her life that she had written off, and she knew that with God, everything is all right. She knew it was all right. She knew with God it was never too late. What dream have you given up on? What passion did God lay on your heart that you've written off because it's too late? What have you lost hope in because the pain of disappointment was too unbearable for you? What have you quit on? What have you said, you know what? It's over. It's done. That dream is done. That hope is done. That thing I was believing for is done. It's dead. It's over with. Hear me, it does not matter how dead it may seem. It doesn't matter how over it may seem. It doesn't matter how lost it may seem. It doesn't matter how impossible it may seem. Time and delays and setbacks have never stopped God before. And even though it may not seem all right, somebody needs to know it's still all right. Everything is all right. Tell somebody everything is all right. She said, Gehazi, listen, my son is dead, but everything is all right. Everything's all right, even though nothing seems all right. And that's important because it's easy for us to say everything's all right when everything is all right. It's easy to say everything's all right when you have no problem, when you've made it through a storm, when everything is going the way that you thought it would and all your ducks have lined up in a row. It's easy to say everything is all right. But can you say everything is all right when nothing around you seems all right? She said, nothing seems all right. That's the next thing I need you to see. Everything is all right, but nothing seems all right. It's great to come into church and to celebrate and rejoice and to praise when it seems like you got a reason to praise. But can you still show up and sing about the goodness of God when nothing in your life seems all right? When the kids that you raised are not doing anything that you raised them to do? When the job that you're on is not anything like what you thought you were signing up for. When the finances aren't there. You can praise him when they're there. Can you praise him when they're not? Can you praise him in the midst of a storm? Can you say, even though nothing seems all right, everything is all right? Can you get that Bob Marley mentality that every little thing is going to be all right? Everybody acting like, I don't know Bob Marley. Okay, let's go to the word then. Let me read out of the text. They're like, I can't do it. Verse 28, it said, did I ask you for a son? Did I ask you for this? Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? See, I feel kind of bad for Elisha because she gets to Gehazi and she's like, oh, everything's all right. She gets to Elisha and she's like, I didn't ask you for this. What is this? She's going crazy. She is unloading on Elisha. Y'all think pastors don't need prayers? Send the prayers. Because she is just like, she's unloading on him. She's like, I didn't ask you for this. Pastor Dustin, you told me last Sunday in your message that every little thing was going to be all right, and nothing's all right. Doesn't seem like it's all right. Doesn't feel like it's all right. And can I be honest, there are times that I'm up here preaching that everything's going to be all right, and nothing's all right in my life. And it's hard. It's like, God, can I even get up there and preach this? And he's like, if you'll preach it, I'll do it. And what we have to begin to learn is you don't need somebody to preach to you. You need to preach for yourself. You need to get to the place where you're able to say, hey, nothing seems all right now, but everything is all right. Nothing seems like I can make it through this, but everything is all right. God's going to do what he's always done. He didn't come through for me once to let me down the second time. He didn't come through for me 2 years to let me down now. He didn't help me conquer 3 giants to get me to the 4th and let me be defeated. Everything is all right. Everything is all right. But she gets to him and she's like, God, Elisha, I didn't ask you for this. You're the one who told me that I would have a son. I kind of feel bad for Elisha. But she's like, it's all good, but it doesn't seem all good. It's all right, but it's not all good. And what I know is that a life with God is always good. Get that out of the way. God is always good. Everything can be caving in around you. God is always good. And there's a lot of people that try to poke holes in that, but hear me when I tell you, God is always good. He is always good. But that doesn't mean that everything you go through is good. God is always good, but that doesn't mean that everything you face is good. God is always good, but it doesn't mean that everything you experience is good. And it is unwise for us to think that God's plan and God's purpose is always going to go on the easiest path. It's what we would like, but that's not what happens. It's what we prefer, but that's not what always takes place. And you know why I think it's so hard sometimes, so painful to experience this lost hope? The reason it's so painful to experience the disappointment is because generally it follows moments of great hope. I think the reason that it's so difficult to experience pain and anguish and disappointment is because it tends to follow moments of great hope. God gave you a word, and you were right in that word, and then all of a sudden an opportunity showed up, and you knew this is exactly what God was talking about. But the reality is, it isn't what God was talking about, but you had convinced yourself that it was what God was talking about. And so then when it falls apart, your high hope goes down because I was so ready to see God do what he said. I think that so often the moments of pain follow moments of great hope. The Shunammite woman had experienced moments of great hope. She had experienced the miraculous. She had seen the impossibility of having a son become possible. She had seen the promise that she would have a son, followed by the sign that she would have a son in her pregnancy, followed by the fulfillment of the promise she would have a son in his birth. But now he's dead. And it's painful. And it's hard. And it's difficult. And it seems over. For anyone who's ever had the hope and the joy of a marriage, only to be followed by the pain of a divorce. The hope and the joy of having more finances than you knew what to do with, only to be followed by bankruptcy. The hope and the joy of a new job only to be followed by a pink slip. The hope and the joy of overcoming an addiction only to be followed by the temptation trying to draw you back in. You know the pain. You know the disappointment. You know the hurt of hearing that the thing you were so hopeful for is not going to happen the way that you thought that it would happen. The thing that you were so ready to see God do is not going to happen. You know that it's hard, and you know that it's painful. And for many of us, it is the hope that we once experienced that makes our current situation so painful. The hope that when he got down on one knee, I was hopeful. This is the time. Put the ring on the finger. This is amazing. And then 2 weeks before, I find out that he doesn't even want to be here. The moments of great hope. But what you don't realize is maybe that 2 weeks ahead of time, ending things was God's way of protecting you from a lifelong misery. Maybe God really does have the perfect person for you, but if you would have settled for them, you would have been miserable your whole life, and you would have completely missed out on what God was trying to do. God is always good, but that doesn't mean everything we experience is good. And so often the pain of lost hope causes us to struggle even more in those difficult situations. Many of us, it's so painful because we've seen God's goodness. We've seen him show up. It's just that right now, life is not feeling good. I know for the Shunammite woman, she would have completely skipped over this part of her life if she could. She would have completely skipped over her son's death. But what if it had to happen to bring her story full circle? What if what she went through had to happen to bring her story full circle? What if the thing that you want to fast forward through in your life is exactly what has to happen to get you to the place where God is taking you? What if the thing that you're trying to just block out and you don't want to see it and you just want to get through it, what if that's the very thing that has to happen so that God can get you to the place that he needs to get you? What if you would have skipped the part that God would have used? She would have skipped this part. She would have completely skipped her son's death. But his death, just like his birth, was the setup for another miracle. The son's death was a setup just like his birth was for another miracle. And I'm not talking about when Elisha prayed over him and he came back to life. Because that's the part, that's the awesome part. That's in this story. That's here in chapter 4. We see this. We see Elisha, he prays over the son. The son comes back to life. It's amazing. But that's not the part I'm talking about. It's a great part. I'm not talking about the son's birth. I'm not talking about the son's death. I'm not even talking about the son's resurrection. Because the last thing I need you to see is there's more to the story. There's more to the story. Somebody say there's more to the story. Type in the chat, there's more to the story. It seems like it's over. It seems like it's done, but there's more to the story. Because that part was good when the son was raised back to life. That part was good. But what if I told you it wasn't even about that? What if I told you this whole story is not even about the time that the son was raised back to life? What if I told you there was a bigger picture? Something bigger. Because your circumstances that you're facing today have nothing to do with where you've been and who you've been in the past. They have to do with what you will do in the future. Has nothing to do with what's been in the past. The Shunammite woman, her story did not end with her son's death, but it did not end with his resurrection either. That's the end of a chapter of her story, but that's not the end of the full story. Someone say this can't be the end. The son is born, he lives, he dies, he's risen again, but that's not even the end of the story. That's the end of chapter 4, but that's not the end of the story. And so many of us have mistaken the end of a chapter as the end of a story. That divorce may have been the end of a chapter, but it's not the end of a story. That your younger years, might have been the end of a chapter, but it's not the end of a story. That closed position might have been the end of a chapter, but it's not the end of the story. That career setback might have been the end of a chapter, but it's not the end of a story. There's more to the story. Her story did not end in chapter 4. It did not end in chapter 4 because we see her come back into the picture in chapter number 8. In 2 Kings chapter 4, she has a son, he dies, he rises again. But she comes back into the picture in chapter number 8. It said in verse number 1, I'm going to read it. It says, now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed that a famine in the land will last 7 years. And the woman proceeded to do as the man of God said, and she and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and her land. So because they had left, they had forfeited their house, their land, everything they had to the king. And the king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, tell me about all the great things that Elisha has done. Look at the timing of God. Some of us think that God is late. God is never late. Some of us think that we're going through what we're going through and it has no purpose. But there's always a purpose. The Shunammite woman's like, I'm thankful that I had a son. I'm thankful that I had time with him. I'm thankful that he rose again after he died. But why on earth did I even have to go through that? You ever made it to the other side and wondered, why did I even have to go through what I just went through? What was the point? What was the point of the pain? What was the point of the struggle? What was the point of the questions? What was the point of the uncertainty? The Shunammite woman, no doubt, had to wonder, why did my son have to die only to be raised back to life? Why did I have to be tormented with that? Why did I have to go through the pain and the agony of what I went through just to be faced with him being alive again? Like, God, it would have been really cool if you just gave me the son and just let him stay. Like, let him be here. A little bit extra of you to have to take his life and bring him back again. I already believed in you when you gave him to me in the first place. But there was a reason. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, tell me about all the great things Elisha had done. Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to appeal to the king for her house and her land. And Gehazi's like, that's the woman. This is the woman, right? What? Haven't seen her in 7 years. This is the woman right here, my lord the king, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life. At the very moment that Gehazi was telling her story, the mom shows up with her miracle and her son. Y'all don't get as excited about the Bible as I do. This blows my mind. Blows my mind. Said the king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned an official to her case and said to him, give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now. Give it all back. Give it all back. Follow me here. If she never would have built the room for Elisha, he never would have promised her a son. If she never would have had the son, I got chills. If she never would have had the son, then he never would have died. If the son never would have died, then Gehazi would have never been telling her story to the king. And if he never would have told her story to the king, then the king never would have given her back her land and her house and the income for 7 years that she never even lifted a finger. If she hadn't gone through it, none of it would have even happened. If she hadn't gone through the painful moment where it seemed like the end, then she never would have seen the new beginning. If she never would have gone through the uncertainty in the death of her son, then she never would have seen the fulfillment of all that God can do. You may not like whatever you're facing right now, but you got to know this can't be the end. You may not like what you're going through, but this can't be the end. There is more to the story. It may be the end of a chapter, close the chapter, but it's not the end of your story. God has more in store for you. He has more in store for you. I'm talking to somebody who came in today, tuned in today, feeling like it was all over. Like your best years were over. Like the great things you always believed for were over. Like the promises God had made were never going to happen. And I'm here to tell you that it's not over for you. You may be down, but you got to get back up because God is leading you. God is directing you. There's more in store for you. This can't be the end. This can't be the end. This didn't happen in vain. There is a purpose. There is a reason. There is a story on the other side of what you're going through. There is a story on the other side of what you're facing. And that story isn't just for you, but it's for people around you. But the amazing thing is, you never know what your story can actually move in your life. You never know how what you're going through can impact what God has planned for you. 4 chapters later, the Shunammite woman sees, oh, that's why I had to go through that. That's why I had to experience that heartbreak. That's why I had to cry myself to sleep. That's why I had to have an urgency to go. That's why I didn't like everything I went through. There was a purpose. There was a reason. And this can't be the end of it. This can't be the end. I want somebody else to say that. This can't be the end. This week, I want you to tell yourself, this can't be the end. You get bad news, this can't be the end. Somebody tells you it's over, this can't be the end. It looks like it's over, this can't be the end. Everything's all good. How are you so relaxed? Everything's all good. How are you so confident? Everything's all good. Because I've already seen God do too much to think that he's going to stop now. I've already seen him show up too many times. I've seen him when the doctors walked out on me. I've seen it when they told me I would die at 30. I've seen it when they told me that I was never going to make it through. You can't tell me that God can't do it for me now. He's been doing it time and time and time again. And the goodness of God was not just for a season. The goodness of God is through every part of my life. Through every part. If you're here this morning, if you would stand with me, please. This can't be the end. This can't be the end. There's more to the story. God's not through with you. Hey, listen, if you're not dead, God's not done. If you got breath in your lungs, you still got a purpose. You still have a calling. Don't allow the enemy to tell you that you might as well just sit down and shut up because nobody cares what you have to say. If you're alive and breathing, God has a purpose and a plan and a calling, and there is a reason for everything that you've had to go through to this point. And it's not the end of the story.